Thank you. And good morning. So, hope you had your coffee. This is going to be like just an overview of what the NIS2 directive brings. And for that, I'd like to first get a show of hands of who knows what NIS is all about. Okay, so that's about half the people in the room. The other half, you're still in the right room. You're just going to find out more info, I guess. All right, so without further ado, as was mentioned, I've been doing IT and cybersecurity for a number of years now. I mostly deal with stuff around cybersecurity, cloud, and things of that nature, helping companies better address their business investments and aligning them with their technology strategy. If you want to get in touch with me, I will likely not have time for any Q&A at the end, but you can find all my contact details on 2d.ro. So what we're going to talk about a bit about today is what the NIS2 directive is, and we'll look at a little bit of history and how we got to this point. Then we'll look at the sectors it covers in the industry and what exactly it asks of the companies and organizations within those sectors, the requirements that it imposes, how is it different from the current NIS directive, and so on and so forth. And at the end, I'll briefly touch on the Cyber Resilience Act as well, which is somewhat related to all the legislation being put through within the EU to address cybersecurity concerns in the industry. So the NIS2 directive, there's a 2 at the end, right? So that means there's a NIS1, or NIS as it's known right now. NIS has come into effect a while back and was meant to address critical providers out there and critical infrastructure in terms of the cybersecurity requirements those critical infrastructure providers would need to abide to. But the thing with directives and the difference between a directive and a regulation at the EU level is directives need to be implemented in national law. So every member state within the EU comes up with its own law following the directive's kind of guidelines. But the way it's applied in national law usually differs from one country to another in some slight respect. Not only that, but the requirements of the directive were vague enough so that the implementation into national law left a lot to be desired. And there was a lot of talk about the many, many differences across the EU between the member states in how NIS was introduced. So for one, the differences themselves, then the gaps into what NIS was supposed to have done, and answering the new trends and new types of attacks and new things that are going on out there, and the differences between member states as well. A lot of stuff has happened since 2016 when NIS came into effect. You can see some of them out there. We had the Pegasus scandal, the gradual increase of the scope of NIS as gaps were being identified, that it was enough to warrant another discussion and an agreement to, hey, let's do an update of this. And NIS2 is the result of that. It's designed to kind of strengthen and harmonize the implementation of the directive across the European Union and to better protect critical activities around economy and society at large. So it does expand on the previous NIS directive, and it aims to enhance what the NIS directive is all about. It now defines operator of critical infrastructure and essential services in a larger scale, and we'll go a bit into what that means and what that entails. It will become law and is supposed to become law in 2024. So you do have a countdown in the bottom right. It's supposed to come into effect, so it already came into effect, but member states have until October of next year to implement it, to put it into national law. Now, next year is going to be an election year over here. And even with the past NIS directive, we had like a 6-month gap from the deadline to when the law actually came out. So we're kind of late to the party, if you will. A lot of companies and a lot of people out there kind of expect that there's going to be a delay this time as well in us not actually meeting the deadline. Now, the downside to that is you don't have the excuse of having to do something for the first time. You just need to update the existing law with the new requirements of the directive. So it shouldn't be as hard or as complex as NIS was back when it was first implemented. So that's not an excuse. It will probably be used as an excuse, but it's not an excuse. So if things are to happen according to the timeline, October of next year is when this directive should be transposed into national law within all member states across the EU. There's some essential changes, but if there's something that you can hopefully leave this session with, is this 5 points right here. So what changes NIS brings? One, fines. This was a bit more fuzzy in the current directive, and it was kind of at the latitude of member states into how they implement the fines and whatnot. This directive, so NIS2, gets closer to what GDPR brought back when it came into effect in 2018, which is large fines of up to 10 million euros or 2% of your total annual turnover, whichever is highest. So that's the maximum cap here. And this is to ensure that the requirements of the directive are enforceable. Two, they did extend the scope. So yes, there's a lot more companies, a lot more organizations that fall under this, including a lot of them in the private sector. So no longer is this a thing where just state companies and whatnot need to abide to this. Now a lot of companies in the private sector will be affected by this. And the fact that they added the supply chain into the whole picture, and I'll touch base on that a bit later, will affect even smaller companies. Three, for the first time in a piece of legislation across the EU, they are trying to find ways to make senior management liable for the failure to implement the requirements of the directive. So that means that if you are found not compliant, your activities as a company might be suspended, and any authorizations that you might need to function might be suspended, and the people in charge might end up being suspended from their role, which is a first in terms of measures that could be taken. There's an extensive list of security measures that are now listed in the directive. It's not like kind of do your best when it comes to security like NIS did. It's a lot clearer now. And just to give you an idea, there's a lot of things that you could implement. If your organization is already, say, ISO 27001 compliant, that covers about 70% of what NIS2 requires. So it's not 100%, but you're a long way there already. But there's a number of requirements that are now put into the law, into one of the articles. And 5, mandatory reporting. So whenever now there's a security incident of any kind, the way reporting will work is, 1, you have to notify the authority within your member state, which in our case is CERTRO, that, hey, we've just identified that we may have been the target of a breach, of an attack, of a security incident with serious implications. And that's within 24 hours. Within 72 hours, you need to come with a follow-up stating, hey, so we've done some research and we found this and that, and we kind of have an idea of what happened. And 30 days later, you either come back with a full report of what happened or an intermediate report of, hey, so in a month, these are our findings. We still haven't finalized the investigation. Or you might be required to provide any such updates at any other time by the authority. So this is now mandatory. The timeline NIS2 came in as a proposal back in December of 2020. And in December of last year, it was adopted by the EU Parliament and EU Council. It came into effect in January of this year, making October of next year the deadline for when member states need to put this directive into law. A lot of member states will kind of push that to the limit or even past the limit, as was the case with NIS1 in some cases, some countries, including Romania. July of next year is when they expect to have the first EU cyclone report. This is also something that came with NIS2, trying to ensure that organizations at the level of the entirety of EU talk to each other about stuff that happened in the individual member states, to kind of transfer that knowledge across and to provide report and insights and recommendations across the EU. So that ensures better communication, and the first joint report is due next year. You see some other timelines that are supposed to happen. The local certs are meant to do an assessment in January 2025, and then updating the list of essential and important entities and doing a revision of the directive, which is scheduled for 2027. Which probably should lead us to NIS3 and so on. Now, when it comes to improvements and new stuff in the directive, NIS1 identified what are called operators of essential services and digital service providers. And overall, there were like 30 types of entities there. The hardening expectations of the original directive were around a risk-based approach, with no obligation whatsoever of prior compliance to the directive, and the sanctions, if you are not compliant, were to be decided by the member states. And just like we had a little leeway with GDPR as well, and whoever's familiar with GDPR and the way it was kind of changed, slightly modified by national law, saying that governmental institutions, even if though they can also get large fines, they can get a waive and like kind of push that fine or ignore that fine for a little while longer as compared to the companies in the private sector, which is like, yeah, the Romanian style to do it. Now NIS2 now covers 67 types of entities, including SMEs under certain criteria because of the inclusion of the supply chain. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So if you are considered to be a critical or essential or sole provider, so they call this sole provider of critical services, for instance, DNS services, right? Even if you've got a company of 5 people, but you're the only one providing that service to either a larger entity that falls under NIS or to the industry at large, you might still fall under the requirements of the NIS2 directive, which is a huge change. The expectations can now be imposed by authorities, and they can come and ask you beforehand, not after an incident, hey, have you been doing your job properly? The notification side we already talked about, and there's a kind of summary slide later on. Supply chain compliance I've already talked about, and then there's some risk management, technical and organizational measures that now need to be implemented, and they're explicitly mentioned in the directive right now. The sanctions, based on which sector you're in, they now differentiate between essential sectors, which part of them were in the original NIS directive, and they added important sectors. The fines in the important sector section are up to 7 million euros or 1.4% turnover. But there's still a lot larger fine to look at than what was before, when it was just left at the discretion of the member states. The suspension of certifications or pending authorization. This is also new, and I mentioned that before. So you might find yourself with any authorization or certification suspended if you're found to be uncompliant until you become compliant. And also a temporary ban on management positions, which is, again, a new thing that they're trying to see how that works. There's another thing there that might allow the authorities to give out fines for the same uncompliance breach of sorts multiple times, which is, again, a new thing and might be prone to abuse. So that's kind of a question mark to see how it gets implemented, because if you get fined, there's some people and companies out there that figure out that being fined for something that you haven't done is just something that you put in the yearly budget. You just don't do it. You pay it because it costs you less than it would cost you to actually do what you're supposed to be doing. And that's fine. You pay the fine and you're good. Well, not if you can get fined multiple times for the same thing. Right? So that might change the game a bit. And working on the cyber crisis cooperation, this is where the EU Cyclone comes in, so the Cyber Crisis Liaison Organization Network. Now, the sectors that NIS2 covers, like I mentioned, there's a lot of sectors that were added, or so they're new, and a lot of other sectors that had their list enhanced. Like, for instance, the energy sector originally just had electricity, gas, and oil. Now you have hydrogen and district heating and cooling, right? And you've got transportation, so critical transportation, health, which is not just healthcare providers, so not just hospitals and whatnot, but now you've got pharmaceutical industry, private clinics, and things of that nature. So it's expanded as well. Space was added now with NIS2. Water waste was not included in NIS1 and is new right now. The public administration, they're supposed to now start doing stuff around cybersecurity as well. That's going to be fun. Digital infrastructure, banking and financial sectors, and now ICT service management. So the B2B side of service management now falls under essential business sectors. And the important business sectors, they're all new. So you see postal and courier services, waste management, digital providers, which is all about online marketplaces, online search engines, and social networking platforms. So this will kind of piss off the social networking platforms out there that have already got some hefty fines on GDPR already. Right, so we'll see how that works out. Chemicals, food, research, manufacturing, they now come under the NIS directives requirements. And you can find these in Annex 1 and 2. So I try to kind of mention which articles you can refer to if you read the text of the directive in the title, and you'll see those mentioned. So which organizations are impacted? Now, for essential entities, you're looking at usually companies that are in the intermediate and large space with over 250 employees and over 50 million in revenue in euros, or over 43 million on the balance sheet. They are, if they're highly critical, they're considered essential entities. In other critical sectors, they're considered important entities. But even like if you're a large company, right now you might fall under NIS2 just because of the size and the impact that you've got on the market. Medium and small companies, it's 50 to 250 employees and 10 to 50 million euros in revenue. And micro and small companies, which are under 50 employees and under 10 million euros in revenue, most of them should not be affected unless, like I mentioned before, there's this thing with sole providers. If you're a three-man company, but you're the only one providing a critical service to one of the big companies that fall under this, they also are required to ensure that their supply chain is covered and can abide to the requirements of the directive. So that means that you have to abide to the requirements of the directive if you want to provide services to any of the companies that fall under the umbrella. So that's the supply chain part. Now, the requirements for organizations are as follows. Management, like I mentioned, they need to be aware and understand the requirements of the directive. Now, depending on where you look, and I've tried to find some statistics about this, but they're all over the place. Apparently, there's anywhere between 30,000 to kind of 150,000 companies and organizations across the EU that might fall under the NIS2 umbrella, which is quite a wide range, so take your pick. The one thing that was kind of constant in the statistics, though, is that somewhere around 80%, 80, are even right now unaware that they might fall under the NIS2 umbrella, and they have no clue as to what they need to do and by when and so on. So management needs to understand what they need to do, because now they become directly responsible if they fail to comply. Reporting, you need to understand how reporting works and have a process on when you run through an incident, how do you report it to the authorities if it's a major incident again, and that's defined in the directive. Doing risk management, which is not something that culturally over here in the Balkans and not just Romania, we're kind of trained to do, I guess. It's more of an attitude where you wait until something happens, and it could happen to you, it could happen to your neighbor or best friend, but when you see it happening, that's when you start asking yourself, hey, so maybe I should do something about it, right? So risk management, it's not something that comes easy to us. That's going to be a challenge. And ensuring business continuity is part of that. So Article 21 of the directive now says exactly what you need to invest in. So you need to address all of these points. There's no exception. And like I said, ISO 27001 kind of covers 70% of this. So if you're already compliant with that, you're a long way on the way there, but you're not there yet. If you haven't done any of these things, or you've done like maybe 2, 3 of them, and you know you're doing them well, then you still have some way to go. I won't try and read all of them, but you can kind of get a feel of what should be done. And these are the areas that they identified that companies, especially in the essential sectors, they're not doing a good job in. Now, there's a lot of things that you could do as an organization to protect your assets, to protect your data. And I'm not sure how many companies out there actually do these and do these well. These are just some examples of stuff you could do around protecting your data, your applications, your endpoints, your network, your perimeter, and so on. When it comes to compliance, when it comes to backup and restore, disaster recovery, monitoring, and all of that stuff. So there's a lot of things you could do, and a lot of them will be mandatory under NIS2. Reporting, like I mentioned, it's only when it comes to a significant security incident, which involves a serious or a possible serious disruption of services or financial losses, where other natural or legal persons have or may have been adversely affected by what they call substantial material or immaterial damage. If you're not sure if it's serious or not, you need to define your expectations better, or you need to work with your legal advisors on how that works. Or you can just err on the safe side of things and report whatever you might think, hey, this sounds like it's serious. The reporting deadlines, as I mentioned, early warning within 24 hours, 72 hours to give an update on that, and to provide an initial assessment of the security incident. Upon request, you are required to provide any sort of update concerning any status updates and whatnot. And within 1 month, either the final report or an intermediate report until the end of the investigation. So what happens if you don't comply? I've already mentioned there's fines for essential and important entities. And for the essential entities, one, management accountability is a new thing. So potential discharge of C-suite managerial functions, or suspension of any certifications and authorizations concerning part or all of the services provided by that entity, which can cause significant disruption if you, again, are found to be uncompliant. So what's next when it comes to NIS then? First off, you need to try and determine whether your business is impacted by NIS. This is just meant to be kind of a primer and should already hopefully give you some idea of whether you might be under the NIS umbrella or not. But looking at the directive and looking at the exact specifications of which companies fall under NIS is the first thing you need to do. Understand if this affects you. You might be in the supply chain of another organization that is required to do so. So try to find that out. Even if you're not a large essential entity, you might be a provider to one. Raise awareness within senior management, because they really have no clue that this is even a thing. According to multiple studies, multiple studies being done at the EU level. Like I mentioned, it's around 80% of companies that fall under NIS2 that have no clue that they fall under NIS2. Educate management about the cybersecurity risks, and then estimate any expenses and plan the budget to actually implement the changes. Review those cybersecurity risk management measures, the list of 10 things that I had on a slide prior, and see what you can do to address those. Assess your own supply chain, so that's going to be interesting. Try to simplify incident reporting, so find a way to define a process that when an incident arises, you are able to report. You know who you should be reporting this to, you know what you should be reporting and when, and so on and so forth. So if you don't have an incident report policy that will abide to NIS, try to define one. Developing your business continuity crisis management plan, and implement any ISMS solutions as per the NIS2 criteria. Again, ISO 27001 is a good start. Ensure secure development practices if you're in the security development space. Now, the thing is, there's this quote, I don't know if you know Jim Butcher, a sci-fi author. You don't have to run faster than the bear to get away. You just have to run faster than the guy next to you. Right? So when it comes to cybersecurity attacks, the bad guys will stop when they try and keep on hitting hurdles. They'll just go for the lowest hanging fruit, for the easiest target. And all you need to do is not to become 100% unhackable and protected, is just make it so that the bad guys don't target you anymore, because it's just too tedious and time consuming for them to do so. So unless you're a target, it's usually easier if you've done some basic stuff, it will deter attackers. You won't ever be 100% secure. If someone's out to get you, they will get you. It's a matter of time. And it's not about what do I do when I get hacked, it's about what do I do, it's not about what do I do if I get hacked, sorry. It's what do I do when I get hacked, right? So that's what you should focus on. Understanding how you will address the one time maybe when you will get hacked, because you will remember that. And if you're not ready, that's going to be a problem. Now, just a few minutes on the CRA, on the Cyber Resilience Act, because this is also a piece of legislation that's coming. This was discussed recently within the European Commission, and this is a quote by the European Commission President. The thing is, there's a need for a cyber defense policy, especially when it comes to software, right, and IoT and devices and whatnot. So the Cyber Resilience Act is a new piece of legislation that will be coming soon. It's not yet in effect. It's still being worked on, but it's applicable to all products with digital elements. So that is anything that is intended or reasonably foreseeable to include a direct or indirect logical or physical data connection to a device or network. So anything that connects to the internet, anything that connects to the cloud, anything that's connected right now will fall under the CRA. This means any software or hardware product and any related cloud solutions. These are also divided into subclasses. They've identified something that's called critical products with digital elements, and they've defined risk classes. Now, 90% of products will likely fall into the default category, where you just need to do a self-assessment and you need to ensure that you're doing security right. This is where domestic robots and smart speakers and toys and hard drives and your smart fridge that sends out spam will fall into. But 10% of products will fall under the critical products, and it's class 1, which involves either a self-assessment or a third-party assessment to ensure that you're compliant, which is ISMS, browsers, password managers, antivirus software, SIEM systems, microcontrollers, and so on. And then there's class 2, which will always require a third-party assessment to ensure that security is done right, which covers operating systems, hardware, security modules, industrial firewalls, CPUs, and so on and so forth. Now, the thing here is, it addresses everyone. Whether you manufacture such a product, a digital product, whether you import it or distribute it. you will have to abide to the CRA. And you need to ensure that you place a product on the market that does security right. A few things that are part of the main requirements. You need to assess the cyber risks prior to launching your product. You need to monitor that product for the entirety of its life cycle and to provide free security updates for it, which is not something that happens nowadays. You've got a product and then you've got maybe 1 year of security updates and that's it. You need to buy the next version because you don't get security updates anymore for it. Reporting obligations are a thing here as well in case of security incidents, and documenting this is also required. So you can only place products that are in conformity with the CRA on the market, and you need to include always additional information, especially contact information for that digital product or hardware or software product that's put out there. And in case of a non-compliance, you might be forced to withdraw or recall those products off the market if it's a physical product. Again, sanctions and fines, and these are even higher than GDPR and NIS2. So these go up to 15 million euros or 2.5% of turnover. And it's not excluded to also have this cover multiple fines for the same infringement, to enforce and to try to push companies to be compliant. Now the roadmap here, they announced it back in September of 2021. The proposal from the EU Commission came in September of last year, and it entered the trilogue, the dialogue between the three entities at the EU level, so the EU Commission, the Parliament, and the Council. So they're now discussing it and putting the legal bits together. This is expected to be adopted somewhere in the 2024-2025 timeframe, so it is coming. It's not, so there's no piece of text that you can now browse. They're working on it. There's some drafts, but it's going to be a work in progress for a while. But the thing is, this is coming, and you need to prepare for that. Best practices when it comes to this, before you even know what's coming, is to try and look into cybersecurity compliance management. So anything that has to do with the compliance management on the cybersecurity side, if you start doing it now, you'll be in a way better position 1, 2, 3 years down the line when this thing comes into effect. So you see some ideas here. Why you should start preparing for this? Well, you will save costs if you start early, because otherwise it's just going to be the same cost but in a short amount of time, and compliance does take time. A lot of people are involved, and you can avoid potential penalties, you can get peace of mind, contribute to national security, and avoid potential disruptions. And with that, I'm done. Hopefully this has given you some insight into what's coming, both in terms of NIS2 and the CRA. I will be around today all day, so you can find me and ask me anything, but I don't think we'll have time for questions now. All right, thank you.